Hello everyone, my name is Dogly. Last video, I got lucky, won the 50-50, and summoned Shenhe. Since then, I quickly farmed her boss materials and have had 5 or so days to test out a fully built level 90 Shenhe, and in this video I'll share my early impressions of this new character at Constellation 0. Shenhe is designed to be a niche character that supports other cryo units. But there's still one big question that needs to be asked. How does Shenhe stack up against other support characters, especially ones that might be more flexible with their team options? In particular, I think it's worth comparing Shenhe to primarily Albedo, since his skills proc also serves to add additional damage to your attacking characters. Kazuha is also an interesting character to consider for comparisons as well. I don't really want to bury the lead here, so I'll be upfront and say that Shenhe does provide worthwhile value to certain cryo teammates, particularly ones with high percent damage bonus and high crit damage. What Shenhe excels in is front-loaded damage, which is in my opinion usually far more useful for speed clears than sustained damage over time, assuming in either case that the total damage is the same. High damage with relatively quick build-up, like with Raiden Shogun and arguably Eula, have proven themselves to be impressive ways to speedrun, and Shenhe's build-up time is arguably even less than these characters, and she doesn't rely on her high burst cost to provide that damage. Front-loaded damage isn't always better than sustained damage because timing can be really important, but Shenhe's ability to give multiple teammates this front-loaded damage can let her have a little bit more flexibility in terms of when she's dropping that damage and when she can have the best opportunity to take out an enemy and move on to the next. That said, Shenhe does suffer from some pretty major problems, particularly within team building. Her buffs encourage mono-cryo gameplay and lots of cryo teammates, which will then cause you to suffer from a lack of elemental reactions. With Shenhe, you're often having to choose between maximizing her buff potential or getting an elemental reaction that will help your main DPS more. This makes Shenhe feel like she alone isn't enough to be the glue to bring your teams together the way that Goru or Albedo have become the glue for many Geo teams these days. There are very few teams in the game that I've discovered where Shenhe is the best in slot support character. That said, she can be usable in a variety of cryo, freeze, and potentially some melt teams to moderate success. Ultimately though, fitting her on a team that reaches high meta standards when she is without her signature weapon can be really hard, but fitting her onto a team that is viable, even if not quite top tier, is really easy to do. Shenhe is not the most free-to-play friendly character out there in my opinion, but she definitely can provide value if you're willing to go to the extremes of making a team work for her. The math later in this video will help you understand Shenhe's value and her limitations. The way Shenhe supports her team is with her elemental skill. After using her elemental skill, she can swap to any cryo damaging teammate and cause their cryo damage attacks to deal more damage for their next 5 or 7 cryo hits. 5 if you used Shenhe's press skill and 7 if you used her hold skill. Ultimately, I think using her press or her hold will come down to your personal preference and how fast your team can go through a complete rotation. If you can rotate your whole team in about 10 seconds, then using Shenhe's press skill is fine because that's the cooldown on her press skill, but if your burst animations and such take a longer time, then Shenhe's hold might be better for you. If she has multiple cryo teammates, then they can quick swap and each will get the cryo buff as long as they attack before Shenhe's skill effect expires. If one of her teammates has no way of dealing cryo damage though, then that teammate will not benefit from Shenhe's buff at all. One of the most important things that we need to understand before we can really judge Shenhe's support capabilities is how her supporting damage is calculated, and how Genshin calculates damage in general. The short explanation of Shenhe's damage is that she adds a high percentage of her total attack stat to her teammates' damage, and that number is plugged into the plus damage flat portion of the Genshin impact outgoing damage formula, which we'll look at later. I've seen a number of bigger channels try to show the damage Shenhe adds simply by using a cryo character without Shenhe's buff and then using it with the buff and finding the difference. However, if you're not sure if you should be summoning for Shenhe for your characters and your available weapons, seeing someone else's characters and their weapons and artifacts and their damage can really obscure what the heck it is that Shenhe herself is doing. In this video, I'll do my best to explain the formulas in a way where all you'll have to do is plug in your cryo attacking characters' percent damage bonus, crit damage, and Shenhe's anticipated attack stat, and then the spreadsheet will crunch all the numbers for you and find out what Shenhe herself is adding to your team. I think using the whole damage formula to calculate Shenhe's buff is a bit complicated and problematic, but fortunately there is a way to simplify things so that it's really easy to calculate Shenhe's actual damage, and I'm going to be providing a Google Sheet for you to use to super easily do this on your own. Before I show that spreadsheet though, I want to briefly talk about multiplying polynomials so you can at least understand the math and logic behind it. Alright, so I made this little cute Bennett animation to more of show Bennett writing poetry, but I think it definitely can work as Bennett being a little math student as well. So with Bennett's help, we're going to go over the math that we'll be using. So first things first, we want to cover multiplying polynomials together. So polynomial is just an expression with multiple units. So here we have 4x plus 1 multiplied by 3x plus 7. You've probably seen a diagram that looks a little bit like this with all of these arrows. These arrows are just showing you the order of how you're multiplying things together. So following the arrows, we can see that we're multiplying 4x by 3x, then we're multiplying 4x by 7, then we're multiplying 1 by 3x, and lastly we're multiplying 1 by 7. And then all we're doing is just adding all of those things together. Once we add all of those things together, we end up with 12x squared plus 31x plus 7. But really the big thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that when you're multiplying polynomials, you're multiplying each individual unit in one bracket with every unit in the other bracket. Now, the Genshin impact outgoing damage formula is just a collection of 3 different polynomials that are listed here. The total attack stat of the attacking character times the percent of their skill ability then added to that is damage flat, which we'll definitely look at later because that's really the most important thing here. Then we're multiplying that by 1 plus your percent damage bonus. Percent damage bonus includes things like cryo damage bonus. If your weapon has like a charged attack or a normal attack boost, that usually is a percent damage bonus. And then lastly, you multiply that by 1 plus your crit damage percent. So like I said, we really want to be paying attention to damage flat here because this is where Shenhe is going to be plugging a number into your attacking character's damage formula. And because this is the only place where Shenhe is actually providing a buff to your attacking character, this is really the only thing that we need to pay attention to. So all we're going to be doing is multiplying damage flat by everything in those other 2 polynomials. Once we plug that in, the equation looks something like this. Shenhe's off-field attack stat multiplied by either 77.6% or 82.2%. That would be using Shenhe's skill level 9 or skill level 10 respectively, depending on whether or not you wanted to use a crown on her. And then again, you're just plugging that in and multiplying it by the other polynomials. Note though that if your crit rate is notably less than 100% on Shenhe's teammate, even after cryo resonance and after your blizzard strayer boosts, then instead of plugging in just crit rate, you would probably want to plug in your crit rate multiplied by your crit damage percent. Here's the spreadsheet. I'll be providing the link to it in the description and in the comments of this video. In order to use it yourselves, all you're going to have to do is just go to File, make a copy. Once you make a copy of the spreadsheet, you'll be able to edit all of these things on your own time. So I try to color code it to make it really easy to understand. I won't be going over the entire spreadsheet, but basically more or less what you're going to be doing is only editing these purple cells. And the orange cells above the purple cells will be telling you how to fill those out. So where it says 3735 here, that's my Shenhe's personal attack stat. All you would have to do is put in your personal attack stat, or what you anticipate your Shenhe's attack stat being. My Shenhe is using all attack percent main stat artifacts, and she is using the primordial Jade Wing Spear. So if you haven't summoned Shenhe yet, but you have a Jade Spear and maybe that's the weapon you're thinking of using, you can just use 3735 as your sample number. If you are going for her signature weapon, I've seen players able to get closer to 4,000, in some cases, 4,100, 4,200 with her signature weapon. If you're using something else, you can just kind of calculate that damage by itself, just by adding her base attack stat to the weapon stats and multiplying it by the attack percent and all of that stuff. But so again, you're just putting her actual attack stat here. This next column just spits out what the percentage is. So you'll see on this spreadsheet, I have tabs for skill level 9 and skill level 10. You can use either of them to calculate the damage. I'm at skill level 10 for my Shenhe, so I'm going to be using mostly this tab. So at skill level 10 with my attack stat, she is adding 3,070 damage to that plus damage flat part of the damage formula. And again, all you have to do is just read the orange cells for directions, fill in the purple cells accordingly, and down here in the green cells, it'll just spit out Shenhe's actual damage that she's inputting for different common levels of resistance shred, or different common levels of cryo resistance. So again, I don't want to go and spend too much time on this spreadsheet. You guys can take a look and mess around with it on your own. This last section down here just talks about if you wanted to enter custom cryo shred amounts or custom cryo resistance amounts, you can do that here. Just make sure that when you're using this section, you're still filling all of these purple cells out first. You only fill these out afterwards. And then in order to do this, you have to just make sure that your custom shred is higher than your cryo resistance. Otherwise, the formula will kind of break itself. But yeah, so that's the spreadsheet. I hope you guys can utilize it really, really well. And I hope it's something that'll be helpful for you guys. Here on the teammate 3 slot, this is basically just me plugging in my personal Ayaka. And we can see then over here at teammate 3, my Ayaka is dealing in most situations around 95,000 damage, with our Shenhe's providing 95,000 extra damage to my Ayaka, which then translates to, once we add in other teammates, that translates to about 13,000 DPS, that 13,000 damage per second that Shenhe is adding. I know in other places DPS in Genshin has become an acronym for damage per screenshot, but here I'm using DPS to mean damage per single second. So also note for these spreadsheets, I really am not counting Shenhe as being able to buff her own damage in a significant way, which is why my spreadsheet caps at 3 teammates. I imagine you guys would be using this spreadsheet to put in her teammates, not her own damage. So there's a number of reasons for this. First, Shenhe's best build is to use a Gladiator 2-piece and a Shimenawa 2-piece artifact set, and to heavily focus on attack percent stats. Since she wants an attack percent goblet and she doesn't use Blizzard Strider, she basically gets no cryo damage percent bonus from her artifacts. And because of the attack percent focus, she also basically has unusable crit stats. Bonus damage percent and crit damage are really the only things that can increase her buff's damage outside of her flat attack stat and outside of resistance shred. And she doesn't have, the percent damage bonus or the crit damage, so she's not really buffing herself by a significant amount at all. Additionally, you'd want to assume that any character filling in Shenhe's slot would still provide value and damage as well, so counting Shenhe as the 4th cryo character that can use her buff to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, she's not really benefiting from her own buffs a lot. Alright, so I think it's also then super important to compare her to some other characters. So my Albedo crits for about 30k with his elemental skill, while his non-crits are around 9k. With a 50% crit rate, this means he's dealing on average 19.5k per hit, and his elemental skill can trigger every 2 seconds. So that means my decently built Albedo has a damage per second of around 9,750 damage per second. So in my personal opinion, if you can't get your teammates in gear to the point where this spreadsheet shows Shenhe dealing significantly more than 10k, then it's just really not going to be a good use of your Shenhe, and Shenhe would be outclassed by other characters like Albedo on that particular team. We also have to keep in mind that Albedo's ultimate has a much less energy cost than Shenhe's, and his ultimate will also transfer a pretty huge amount of elemental mastery to his teammate, something that Shenhe can't do. So I personally think the rule of thumb is if you can't get your Shenhe to be dealing at least 10,000 damage per second with all of these calculations in the spreadsheet, then it's just not actually worth it to use Shenhe on that team. Albedo also has access to extremely great free-to-play weapon options like the Cinnabar Spindle, and Shenhe really is going to suffer unless she has a 5-star weapon or a highly refined lithic spear, which is a gacha weapon and not really a free-to-play weapon anyway. Kazuha as a support like Albedo has access to a pretty amazing free-to-play weapon for him. For him, that's the Iron Sting, and like Albedo, Kazuha can buff a wide variety of teammates with his elemental mastery due to his skill passive. So I think overall Albedo and Kazuha are just so much more flexible units than Shenhe. But as the spreadsheet does show, pairing Kazuha and Shenhe together can be a viable way because of their synergy in both being able to buff cryo damage. And in certain cases, if you take the care to design a team specifically around Shenhe, then she can work very, very well. However, without painstakingly catering towards Shenhe's strengths, just slapping her on any old team isn't going to provide much value. And that way, I think that Shenhe's very different from most support characters. Most support characters, you're either pairing them specifically with your main DPS to strengthen your main DPS, but for Shenhe, you have to build an entire team around her in order to get her buff to be worthwhile. There's also one more thing that it should at least be considered during the coming weeks as people are able to test Shenhe more, and that is how well she works with reverse melt teams. Reverse melt is notable in that rapid cryo hits in a row can benefit from the reaction's boosted damage, basically because when pyro is hit by cryo, the pyro status isn't cleared immediately. This is why Chongyun's fast elemental burst makes him a good reverse melt abuser. Because Shenhe's buff relies on her cryo teammates attacking very, very quickly to consume her stacks, the speed of play that Shenhe encourages could hypothetically be a speed that pairs very well with reverse melting. The biggest problem, of course, though, is that once you replace a cryo teammate, or if you replace Kazuha with a pyro teammate, then this means that Shenhe has fewer teammates that will actually get her buff. However, I do think that it's still possible in some team compositions that Reverse Melt could be viable with Shenhe, just because of how much the extra damage Reverse Melt provides, and again because the speed of Shenhe's attacks and the speed that she encourages with consuming her stacks can mesh pretty well with the speed that it takes to successfully perform multiple reverse melts. At this time though, I just don't have sufficient data to say one way or another if reverse melting with Shenhe is actually good. In conclusion, I think there are definitely a few cryo damage focused teams where Shenhe can shine. I personally think Ayaka is the single best character to pair with Shenhe, since Ayaka is an extremely fast attacking character that consumes her buff stacks very quickly and can help your rotations be very efficient because of her fast speed. Ganyu is another decent choice due to her area of effect on her charged attack splinter and her multi-hit burst. Ultimately, Shenhe will want cryo teammates that can very quickly perform multiple cryo hits, and any such character equipped with high cryo damage bonus artifacts and high crit damage gear has potential to work with her. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you found the information here helpful or the spreadsheet that was provided helpful, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Take care everyone, I'll see you later. In the meantime, I wish you all the best of luck with your wishing and your artifact farming. Bye.